All right, so today we're going to be working on one of these Uni-dose machines right here. Basically what's going on, you can kind of see this chlorine level, it's pretty high, or at least the bleach and water mixture. It's pretty high, it hasn't been pumping and it hasn't been doing its thing. Usually you have to do this like every 6 months, maybe a year, is replace these duckbills. They got one here, they got one here, they also got one down at the bottom, and they got one up here. So this is the injection line, and I've already had to replace this. I replaced this little spring thing. I'm pretty sure it goes this way. I got to look at the instructions again. It was a while ago. But basically what happened is this thing was unable to inject. It was getting its proper prime, and I'll show you what the proper prime will look like. This line jumps pretty strong. This is just like it's not polyurethane. It's like a sanoprene or something like that. It's a line that holds up pretty well in bleach. But basically there is, oh, there goes the little cap, whatever. This thing was old. This piece comes off, and inside this is where the spring goes. So in above this gray thing. This will plop in like this way, and the cap is down at the bottom. So when this juices up, it pushes and compresses this spring so the chlorine can inject into the line, and then that spring just quickly closes back down. When it does that, it keeps this water pressure flowing from down here from backfilling into this line. So only chlorine is injected into the system through this. And let me go ahead and take some of this apart. But first, let me get this hose out so I can show you guys. All right, so right now we got the little hose out there. We're gonna turn this on and show you what happens. You see how this line is jumping? That's what you want to see. Like, that means we're properly injecting. Listen. You hear how it makes like a... That's the chlorine injecting into this line as the water pressure is going through. So water will come through this line. This is like the mixing tank. This is where like the chlorine, all the junk just sits with the water, and it bonds with like any rust or chemicals, whatever, and it drops down to the bottom of this tank right here. This, you want to flush that out. That's why there's a hose attached down here, because all of like the settlement and the things that get in the water, the nasty stuff, that's just going to sit at the bottom. Specifically what the chlorinator is doing, this is pumping chlorine in there. It usually binds with the sulfur smelling compound that happens with like well water. It's just nasty junk. Well, let me go ahead and take this apart and show you guys what's up. This is the chlorinator. Let me zoom in for you. This comes right off. You just use 2 pliers for this if you want to get it off, or if you simply just want to get the top line off. I'm just going to take the top line off to show you guys this part. Oh geez, bleach everywhere. You see how you got this little metal ring on here? This is going to be the crimper. It kind of crimps a little piece into this line as you put it onto this, and it just makes a strong seal. Notice how like the chlorine is just coming out of this. And also notice it's not backfilling from the other line. Basically, the reason why it's not backfilling is because I have that spring up there plugging the water. But inside this line right here, when you have this little crimp, as you tighten this nut down onto this piece right here, it's like a little vertical piece, and it gets bigger as it goes down. That crimps around it and makes a watertight seal. So right now, everything's working fine. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll go ahead and, man, this chlorine stinks. It's all over my hands. Yeah, because it's got chlorine in there. Watch how this is already primed. You see how it's got juice coming? That means it's primed, it's ready to fly, it's ready to do its thing. I got chlorine all over my face. Good times. So this duckbill is okay. But if it wasn't okay, what you do is you take this piece off. Just notice how I just took a little wrench to it, and it's stuck in here. And I can't get it out. I'll use my pliers. This duckbill right here, you can tell this is okay. You see how it's all flat, it's smooth. Basically what happens is water is injected through that, and this little piece, it opens up, it goes, oh, you can't see it. This piece opens up and it juices it in. Similar to something that looks like this. Notice how it opens up as it squeezes. This one is used. You see how it's just like stuck open? You can kind of see through it. It's not cool. This thing's old. So this one's been replaced. Man, that bleach. But simply you just put that in there, shove it in, screw it on, and that's replacing the duckbill. It's that easy, and it keeps it pressured and primed so we can keep juicing the system with like some chemicals. Yeah, I don't drink this water. This is not good water to drink. This is just so you don't have like smelly water and you're able to get it done. So now at this point, we need to reprime the line because we just replaced a duckbill. You typically replace all these at the same time so you don't run into that issue of like, oh, did I replace it this time? Well, probably not. So you can hand tighten these. I usually hand tighten it, but you just want to make sure there's no leaks around the rim and around the base. Turn it on and let it prime up. This is what a dead line looks like. There's no movement in this. None at all. There's no jump, but it'll start to pick up. I'm gonna wash my hands while it picks up. You can also hear that deep knocking noise. That's the diaphragm. So notice how our thing is jumping. Can you see it? She's got a jumper. That's what we look for. So when it's jumping, it's working. This thing is basically the sensor you have. Usually if this fills up with rust, you can either try to take it apart and clean it out so the flow sensor will go through. That way, when that sensor is good, this thing is basically attached to this. And when it feels water flowing through this, it kicks this on, the injection pump. So this basically works based on if there's water running through this line right here, right now. But when this fills up with rust, and it does, take this apart, clean it out with some bleach. If that doesn't work, just replace it. It's called like a flow switch or something like that. But yeah, that usually helps. So typically the main issues you're gonna get with this is going to be with the duckbills. I replace these like every 6 months to a year. And just to show, this is a Uni-dose. You're gonna have to replace these more often if you put a high percentage of bleach in here. I usually use 1 jar to this, like, I want to call it a 40 gallon, maybe a 50 gallon drum. And if you want more chemical in your water, well, in reality, it just makes it smell better. Listen to the knocking noise. You can turn it up. You hear how it's a little bit deeper? Now let me turn it all the way down. Sounds like a tiny little heartbeat. I usually keep it around 55 because the tenants probably don't want the water smelling like bleach, but they also don't want it smelling like sulfur. So we're gonna do that. This piece is the diaphragm. This is what makes that knocking noise. This seal sometimes gets worn out by the conditions of the water, and this thing can't sit flush and flat on there. So you won't get this knocking noise that you hear here when this thing goes out. All you gotta simply do is replace this thing and put a new one on. These are usually like, I don't know, it's like 80 bucks now. It's hard to get these things. They're discontinued. So it's like you either replace this or just keep it going. But I bought a bunch of parts in the past. Same thing with these duckbills. I used to get these things for like 50 cents. Now it's like 20 bucks. It's like the black market on eBay. It's almost like a Zensko breaker. But yeah, that's how you maintain the Stinner pump. You also got a little screen down at the bottom. That little thing, you see that gray thing? It's like, I can't even point to it. Yeah, I can't. It's below that white piece. It's a screen just to keep all that sediment and those particles from getting in it. All those sediment and particles you see at the bottom, you aren't going to drink that stuff. It just sets down with time. And that's how the chlorinator works, and that's how you can keep it functioning and doing its thing. Again, all you need for this is going to be 2 pliers, and if you're working on this too, yes, you will have to replace it from time to time. I had to replace mine. Eventually this stuff is just trash, and it just becomes extremely brittle, and you got to replace it. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's simply just a leak, and you just have to cut the line and then put this cap on, and then put the, oh, I could turn this off. What am I doing? And then add in that little washer thing that we had. I no longer have that washer. I had it up here. but it's basically like a little circle washer, that metal thing. You just strap that on there and have this nut behind it. And as soon as you tighten down the nut, it makes a little crimp inside the line. It looks something like this. Actually, you can't really see it because it got eaten alive. But basically, it just crimps that and you're good to go. Oh yeah, I guess that would probably help. So some signs that your chlorinator is not working, the Uni-dose, is that first, like I showed you, that water level does not go down at all. If that water level is not going down in that little tank, then that's usually your duckbills. Second is if you notice your water smelling kind of funky, again, that just means you either A, need to turn up that little dial to add more chlorine and inject it into the line. B, you're not using enough chlorine into it. I usually say use 1 gallon of bleach. I use Clorox. Don't use the cheap brands. They kind of dilute it with water for every like 40 to 50 gallon drum. Or C, like I said, the duckbills are down, or your injection line, that little spring thing, that could be a issue. And then I guess the fourth thing could be your diaphragm, which is that little circle thing. But I've only had to replace that once in like 10 years for this little Uni-dose. So that one's not really a major issue, so you don't really need to worry about that one. Oh, and then the next thing is simply if that line is jumping. So if that black line is jumping, you're in the go, everything's okay. But other than that, if that black line is not jumping, then that means no bueno. That just means it's injecting into the system. I also have these type of pumps. This was the old one that I had. This was like a Stenner pump. So basically how these work is they have this little tube in here. This kind of works like your duckbills, but this thing spins and it injects chlorine. So it would be from down here, because this is where your chlorinator is at. Like this little piece would go inside that big juice jar. And then this piece would be your injection line that goes into the line. Basically how this would work is this thing spins, and as it spins, there's like some wheels that are really, really tiny, and it squeezes the juice up that tube and then goes up there into the line. You can kind of see how it's like smashed against the wall. That's basically how it works. But this, if you wanted to replace this head, this simply just makes a quick quarter turn. Or actually, that's like 1/8 of a turn. This thing comes right off. And then you can simply just put it right back on. And it tightens back in. Typically, the thing that goes out is this tube. So you can kind of see this piece right here. All you got to do is you take this face off with these screws, and this thing literally slides right out. So this tube piece will just slide out, that will slide out, and then you slide the new tube in. It's kind of tough to get it in. You almost have to, while you're putting this in, turn the pump on. There's like a little switch back there, and then it just pumps it through, or at least like stretches it out and then puts it on. And then obviously once you get them on, they call these like cordials or something. I can't remember what these are called, but those are going to be your waterproofant on this one, or your waterproofer. So as you tighten it down, it crimps the line and it tightens. That's it. So that's for the Stenner.